In the long silence that followed, the two flames went out. There was no wind, and the dark silence turned thick as asphalt, connecting sky and desert into a murky whole. At last, Shakyung uttered one word in the darkness. Fuck! Extrapolate that action out to the billions upon billions of stars and hundreds of millions of civilizations, and there's your picture, Luoji said, nodding in the darkness. That's really dark. You just summarized our current moment of everything. I feel like
absolutely, and I think it's tough. I mean, I will say that I'm one of the 7 people in the world who actually did not mind the ending, or at least the penultimate, at least the Daenerys arc. I was like, yeah, where did you think this was going? This is a story about how monsters are made, and we've basically been being invited to judge these terrible people while rooting for somebody who is being treated the way these terrible people were treated, which is what made them into monsters. This is a brutal world, and that you actually got, and again, this relates directly to what we're about to talk about. And it's actually an extraordinary act, because all the characters in Game of Thrones are deeply traumatized. And it is a kind of extraordinary act of heroism and will required to transcend that trauma to become something other than a brutal and ruthless person. And actually, almost none of the characters really do. Some of them succeed at times and fail at times. Most of them succeed at times and fail at times. And there's even, some of the worst characters or baddest characters or most evil characters. There are a few exceptions. There's some just straight up really terrible ones, but there are a lot of characters the Lannisters who are capable of both, right? The Jaime Lannister is this great character who's done some horrific things and then also some noble, kind things, and kind of gets one of the better arcs of the show, one of the more interesting arcs of the show. For sure.
But yeah, I mean, I think I would say Tyrion and Jon Snow managed to transcend their traumas. And even
Tyrion murders his helpless father at one point. Yeah, although you're at that moment, you get it.
Totally. And Tywin Lannister is anything but helpless, even when he is
helpless,
sitting on a toilet with no things. But I mean, I think one of the nice things about the end of that show is that by transcending your past, you are punished for it. Yeah. As Jon Snow is sort of just kind of bundled off to the north. And he
is also, his heroic arc requires him to do one of the most horrific cold-blooded actions in the entire thing for reasons that make entire sense. But I think that is good about it. But it does get tired after season 3, despite some extraordinary battle scenes, right, and some extraordinary kind of epic episodes and all the stuff that all the fans are getting excited about. Okay, the dragons are going to kick some ass, and we're finally going to fight the White Walkers in the Clegane Bowl and all. And it's just this stuff cannot live up to its billing. It just can't. Doesn't matter how well you do it. It's because we're doing fan service and we're just escalating action, because that is how you create a climax.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's totally. It's, and I was reminded of this recently. I think I told you I went and watched the Singing in the Rain part of Singing in the Rain, just that song. And it's, it is utterly, you can tell it's a set, and the props are laughable.
But who cares? It's wonderful.
Magic.
Yeah.
It is absolute magic, because those guys understood that no, we don't want simulation. We want a story.
Part of that is just the magnetism of Gene Kelly. You're also watching. I periodically watch the dance sequence from Make Them Laugh is a good one, and then also Moses Supposes, when he's getting the language, and then he and Donald O'Connor do this incredible. Singing. I sometimes my neighborhood. I live in Culver City, and singing in the studio where they filmed that sequence. is like 5 miles away. And there are moments where I'm just sort of like, yes, I'm living in a holy place. I do feel like sometimes I feel like I moved to the vicinity of the Globe Theater, you know, in order to kind of soak up the aura of that.
Yeah.
Well, shall we get into it?
Go for it.
Right. So this book is difficult to divide in two because it's cut up into 3 parts. And then what basically chapters are years, and sometimes chapters are like 120 pages long, and other times they're like 5 pages long. So it's difficult to divide up. But we stopped towards the end of part 2, but there's a lot that still happens in part 2. Mm-hmm. Kind of the last, in our last episode, the last thing that happens was Luoji goes into hibernation. So the rest of the second half really mostly focuses on Zhang Beihai as our kind of main protagonist and character. And he is focusing his efforts on trying to get humanity to build fusion drives, which would allow for very fast travel to escape the solar system. Now, doesn't say that he wants to build fusion drives in order to escape the solar system. So what he does is he makes bullets from asteroids and then carries out this extraordinary spacewalk assassination, which takes out like 3 of the proponents for what they're calling the aerospace drives as opposed to the fusion drives. It's a technology that he thinks will not be as strong in terms of building spacecraft for Earth. So he secretly manipulates sort of the path of humanity's technological development through assassination using meteorite bullets so that the autopsies won't reveal that these people were murdered. It'll just look like a space junk accident. So that's one thing that happens. Then you also have Wallfacer Hines. We get some of him focusing on improving humans' cognitive abilities. That doesn't really seem like it's working, but with his wife, he discovers something called the mental seal, which is this neurological procedure that allows people to absolutely believe in something. And there's some interesting side plots, and people want to believe, you know, like their wife isn't cheating on them and stuff like that. But they start giving the mental seal to soldiers in order to make them as we later learn, it seems like the purpose of this is to make them absolutely certain that the Space Force in Earth is going to win the Doomsday Battle, you know, which is still, I think, 400 years away at this point. And then we get a little Ray Diaz plot. His wall breaker shows up, and he reveals Diaz's plan. Diaz reacts very differently to the first wall facer, Tyler. Basically attacks and tries to kill his wall breaker. But the plan is that these super powerful hydrogen bombs that Diaz has been building and storing in Mercury, he's not intending to store them in Mercury. He's intending to use them as like a propulsion system to drive Mercury into the sun, which is going to create a chain reaction explosion that will basically destroy the solar system. Now, he doesn't really want to do that. He wants to threaten the Trisolarans with that. Basically, like, we're going to take our solar system and go home. And so he's saying, you know, unless you negotiate with us, we're going to destroy the entire solar system, and, you know, your plans to conquer us will come to no avail. This plan is revealed. The UN is outraged by it. They want to arrest him, but he bluffs them with a kind of doomsday switch that he has wired to his watch. He basically claims that he'll blow everybody up in New York if they try to arrest them. He flies back to Venezuela, and when he gets there, he expects to be greeted as a hero, but he is stoned to death because all of humanity has learned of this plan, and they're outraged that he's going to try to blow up the Earth. Or that he would even consider that a plan. And that takes us to part 3.
Yeah, so part 3, we wake up 180 years later.
And y'all, part 3 is fun.
Part 3 is fun, yeah. Part 3 is, yes, no, I agree, and we're going to get into this with my little meta discussion when we get things going. But yeah, part 3 really cooks. I have been reading this book and listening to it, and I realized the last few days at the day job where I work, I was like, oh, I can take a 10-minute break and I might be able to read 3 pages, which is a good sign. That's a good sign. Right? If that's what you're feeling like about your books, everybody, you're in a good spot. Yep. But So Luoji wakes up, discovers that the Earth has really made a pretty big jump forward technologically. The Wallfacer program is over. He reunites with Da Sha, our favorite police investigator, who the reader of the audiobooks is sort of getting Da Sha a little better. Yeah. He's adding a little like gravel, and he's just doing a little bit better work with it than in the first half, I thought. The first major reversal we discover at the meeting to end the Wallfacer program, Hein's wife, Keiko, reveals that she is Hein's Wallbreaker, and that there were 5 mental seal computers that were created, and through the magic of a negative sign just sort of spread throughout all of the sprawling code. Rather than making people totally assured about victory, they are in fact totally assured about defeat at the hands of the Trisolarans at the Doomsday battle. So this kind of raises the specter that there is in fact a secret cadre of defeatists who are called the Imprinted somewhere in the Space Force. While that is going on, Luoji is exploring the new underground city below Beijing, along with Da Sha. There's kind of this sort of like Benny Hill-esque series of there's six like, deeply ham-handed attempts on his life.
See, I've never watched Doctor Who, but this is what I imagine 80s Doctor Who to be like.
Yeah, actually, no, and like contemporary Doctor Who also, like you're never unconscious of the camp.
Right.
And this section really had this and the number of times that somebody was, you're going to be compensated for these attempts on your life.
And they also never believe Dasha and Luoji, who are always like, this thing just tried to kill us. And they're like, you are crazy.
Cars fall out of the sky all the time.
Yeah.
like 6 times a month.
But they're all like, you're crazy to think it's trying to kill you, and this never happens. It's both of those things.
Yeah.
There's this amazing moment where the waitress is like, there's no way the waitress tried to stab you, the automatic, and then it literally stabs.
It tries to
it's still stabbing the booth.
It's a little I don't know, side quest into a B movie from the 50s. Yeah, it's hilarious. Yeah. But the police finally get to the bottom of it, that there is a 100-year-old virus, which maybe explains some of the ham-handed attempts, called Killer 2 or something like
Killer
that.
5.0, right?
That's right. Killer 5.0. Sometimes you get the sense that Cixin Liu I don't know, just for 50 pages was like, I'm going to have a blast. Who cares?
Well, after that first half of the book, we kind of needed it. You know what I mean? After reading 80 pages of the Dream Lover, mooning about the snow on the mountains, I'm ready for some killer robots.
Totally. But they're like, okay, we're gonna be able to take care of this, but you should probably go live on the surface with the other hibernators, where kind of climate collapse has taken place, because in order to get these fantastically advanced spaceships, they really had to do a number on the climate. There's this sort of interesting aside where climate protection eventually gets equated with terrorism. Greenpeace are basically not quite equal with the ETO, but they're up there.
I mean, this is like chopping down all the trees at the beginning of the first book times 100. This is
exactly.
There's also, I just say, it's not really super important to the plot, but there's a really interesting society of hibernators on the surface too. And some of my favorite scenes are just kind of the conversations that the hibernators have with one another, having this sort of 200-year view of history, but living in this futurism world, even though they, it doesn't really contribute to the plot, but we do get to meet some of the hibernators and hear about what's happened over the last 200 years, like the Great Ravine, which is like a mega depression, and how that's affected Earth's psychology and that sort of thing.
I mean, I think, it's funny, you're right. It doesn't really contribute to the plot, but it definitely contributes to the book wouldn't work without that divide. Yeah, because a big part
it's one of the themes, the hibernators versus the modern people,
the kids, as the hibernators call them. But you couldn't have the Zhang Beihai plot without that divide of
Or
hibernator
Dinghy
versus
warning
moderns.
them, you know.
Oh my God, yeah. Out in space, while this is going on, there is that probe that has been sent to the solar system ahead of the Trisolaran fleet. It is shaped like a droplet. It's beautiful. It's perfectly mirrored. The humans are pretty assured of their space victory at this point because they think that their ships are amazing. They can travel faster than the Trisolaran ships. The Trisolaran ships are decelerating. They're like, those guys, they didn't know what they were in for.
Lost its structural integrity. Some of the ships are accelerating, others aren't. You know, they seem to, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's no way they're going to prevail. So they think in a real echo of 2001, I really, that cropped up for me before there was an overt allusion to it.
Right.
And I was like, wow, this really feels a lot like 2001.
Yep.
They fly on out there with the entire fleet to accept the gift of the droplet. And I defy anybody who has read, I don't know, the Iliad, to be like, I think something's up here. And yeah, sure enough, a group of 4 people, Dinghy and 3 other moderns, fly out to the droplet to investigate it. It doesn't self-destruct. They go, they check it out, they look through
There's actually
electron
a bunch of
microscope
Greeks
at
hidden
it.
in its belly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very, very aggressive Greeks. And like they quickly realize that this thing is technologically advanced in a way that is like kind of incomprehensible to humans. Dinghy at the very last second sort of realizes like, oh shit, tries to warn everybody, but the droplet has made it impossible to communicate back to the fleet. The droplet basically vaporizes those 4 people and their ship. And then in one of just the most like wonderfully over the top space battles. Oh my God. The level of description, the like molten steel, the color of blood floating through the cosmos, in an order of about 20 minutes, the droplet wipes out 1,998 super advanced Earth warships, 2 of which managed to escape due to Dinghy's forward thinking. And then humanity back on Earth basically loses its proverbial shit because they thought they were going to win this, and most of the current generation has grown up with that belief, and they now see, oh, actually, no, we are totally effed. There is no way we can fight this force in any way. I'll kick it back over to you.
So the other thing that happened that we forgot to mention was that right before this space battle, Zhang Beihai, who's also hibernated, he's probably supposed to be in his 50s now, I think. Yep. Ding Yi lived to his 80s in the sort of present and then hibernates as an old man. And so when he shows up, he's in his 80s and he's teaching physics. But Zhang is probably in his 50s or so, maybe late 40s, maybe 60s. He is assigned to be kind of like acting captain. In this irony, they basically sent a bunch of political officers to the future in order to root out possible escapism among the Space Force. And so Zhang Beihai and several of his colleagues are sent to various starships, and they're giving acting captain privileges such that the captains have to funnel all their orders through these political officers, and Zhang Beihai is one of them. So basically, he's given command of the ship, and it's supposed to be just ceremonial. He's just a pass-through. He's a check. Yeah. So the idea is that the actual captain of this ship, if she decides to try to take it out of the solar system as an escapist, he's going to stop her. But turns out all this time, little known to anybody, including us, the reader, Zhang Beihai is actually an escapist. He has done the math 200 years ago, and he has correctly figured that there's no way humanity is going to have the technological capacity to stand against Trisolaris, and that our only chance is to one of our few chances is to preserve some life and some of our starships out of the solar system. And so before this battle is about to take place, He takes the ship out of the solar system, and then they send 3 or 4 other ships, four other ships after them. Shortly after the battle, they get in touch with Zhang Beihai, and they're like, you can't make it. You don't have enough fuel. We're going to catch you. And he says, yeah, I know you're going to catch me. And once the battle's over, I'll come back. I'm not a traitor. I just was trying to preserve these ships. But of course, humanity loses the battles, and now Zhang Beihai is a hero because he saved 5 ships. And so these 5 ships now become the 3rd International, Starship Earth, and Zhang is sort of giving command of this fleet. And they decide they're going to build a society. They're going to flee the solar system, and they aim for a system that's going to take like 2,000 years to get there. And then there's this interesting series of events where all of the captains and officers of these ships realize kind of slowly in a depressing way that they're not going to make it unless they somehow cannibalize each other. They don't have enough fuel. They don't have enough spare parts. They don't have enough supplies. So there's this thing called the Battle of Darkness. And they basically all figure this out at the same time. And there's a battle where some of the ships attack the other ships, but one of the ships prepared for that, and they're in their deep sea state. And eventually one of the ships survives this battle and then takes the spare parts and the fuel of all the other ships and continues heading out of the solar system. And this is all relayed back to Earth. They hear about the Battle of Darkness.
Back on Earth, the droplet is heading for the planet. Luoji believes it's coming to kill him because that's what he's learned throughout this entire time, is that for some reason the Trisolarans think that he's the most dangerous of the Wallfacers.
He also has heard about the Battle of Darkness, which confirms his theory of the universe that he hasn't shared with anybody yet, too. But now he's like, oh, I think I was onto something there.
And what it turns out, the droplet, he goes out into the desert because he thinks that the droplet is basically going to like meteorite into him, and it stops. There's this great moment where I think Dasha calls him like the most like self-centered person in history. And Luoji is like, oh my God, like it's not trying to kill me. Oh, it's trying to turn off the sun's ability to act as an antenna, which got us into this whole problem in the first place. The reason for this is we also learn in a sort of like little moment of narrative sleight of hand that in fact Luoji's spell worked, that he cast on that star system that was about 50 light years away. And we learned that what the spell actually was a way of transmitting to the galaxy precise locations of star systems that might hold intelligent life. And what Luoji is positing, and becomes the title of the book and the animating, thesis of this whole novel, is that the galaxy is in effect an incredibly aggressive place, and that the metaphor is a dark forest that is full of hunters. And if you are a hunter and you learn about the existence of another hunter, you're going to do everything in your power to kill that hunter before it kills you. And so what the Trisolarans are trying to do is they are trying to turn off Luoji's ability to broadcast more spells to the universe. This Luo gets hailed as a hero and as a messiah. His Wallfacer status gets reinstated, but with the droplet there, his spells are worthless. So he works on a project called the Snow Project, which is this sort of half-baked attempt to like track the droplets when they arrive in the solar system. And he's doing it mostly ostensibly so he can get his wife and kid out of hibernation. The rest of the world slowly loses faith in Luo, and he goes from messiah to commoner to fraud. He is basically hated across the world, and our last section of the book ends with him being like expelled from his little hamlet up on the surface. He's kind of fallen into like drink and debauchery to some degree. And he heads out into the woods to find Ye Wensea's grave and the grave of her daughter, Yang Dong, to ostensibly kill himself. I will kick it back to you for the conclusion.
So he does have a plan. And he has brought with him a gun, and he also has on his body a similar kind of dead man switch device as Ray Diaz. And he starts talking, addressing the Sophons, and he explains that the Snow Project, where they were putting a bunch of bombs in various places and this kind of like stellar oil slick material in various places, that he actually has designed it perfectly that if the bombs go off, it will kind of turn the sun into a lighthouse that will also broadcast the exact location of the Trisolarans, which will probably result in the destruction of Trisolaris and Earth. And he gives them 30 seconds to negotiate, or he's going to kill himself, which is going to set off that detonation. And after a few seconds, these 3 Sophons materialize and unfold into another dimension in front of him, and they become kind of like giant like iPhones for texting, and they start texting with him. And he's talking, and they agree to negotiate with humanity. The fleet is diverted, and we have what appears to be a peace between Earth and Trisolaris. And that pretty much, and then Luoji is reunited with his wife and daughter. And there's an interesting scene where the Watcher contacts Luoji and sort of wishes him well. And there's a kind of like, let's hope that our 2 civilizations can move forward in peace. And that is the end.
Yeah, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
And, so... I have been. This has been a really, really interesting project reading this particular second book.
Yeah.
And before we get into our questions and stuff like that, so I wanted to talk about how you talk about books that. So my experience of this is that I'm very happy that I've read it. I'm very interested by the ideas in it. I think that some of the passages of the space battle is just a tour de force in terms of like action writing. We're going to get into my reasons for like struggling with it. So I want to be very clear that I think that this is, I think this book is important.
Yeah.
I think that it is well constructed. Due to the way that information is handed out and characters are evinced, it is deeply not to my taste. And what I wanted to talk about here is basically like a little moment of like, how do we do this? How do we talk about books that we perhaps don't like, but we find real value in? Or it's not even that we don't like it, because I did enjoy this. I was looking forward to reading it, but it is very much not to my taste. And it's so easy when we are talking about books and things like that to get stuck in this problem of, I like it, so I need to defend it, or I don't like it, so I need to attack it.
Yeah.
And I think this book deserves better than that, because it is complicated and philosophical and really big. But yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, like what is your experience of, how do you talk about things that are not to your taste, but you still want to respect?
It's a great question. I think, well, one of the things that I have observed in doing this podcast with you for over 2 years, maybe coming up
almost
on 3, is I would say that if I were to name your strengths and tastes, you are more plugged in to the way that people who live literary lives talk about books, talk about literature. You're more inclined to reach for terms like tone of voice. You did an MFA, and you have this training. Whereas a lot of that knowledge, I enjoy talking about those things too. A lot of that knowledge I've kind of bootlegged, right? Or bootstrapped. And one of the patterns I've noticed is that I think you are more likely to be frustrated by having your expectations frustrated. That you're more likely to say, I prefer books to be like this, and this one is not like that. and that
Yeah.
is not to my taste. I think
Right.
I'm probably a little bit more loosey-goosey and a little more willing to say, I'm curious what this thing is and what effect it's having. And sometimes the effect it's having is it's boring me or you know, and so I think that's one part of that. But I think the other part of that too is that I think you and I both agree about this, is that really not interested in ranking books or deciding which books are good, which books are bad. I'm really interested in description of what's going on. And I really enjoy this book, but I do find it deeply flawed. And I think the answer to your question is to try to describe what about it is that we like, and what is that doing for us? What are the things what do we like about the things we like, and what do we don't like about the things we like? Because if you don't do that, you're just like, well, you're supposed to develop your characters in such and such a way, and they're not doing it, and it's against the rules. And F the rules. There's
Screw
lots
the
of, and in
rules.
fact, any great work of art breaks some rules. And so I think that, my sense of the answer to the question is, if there are parts of the book to your distaste, and there are parts to my distaste, is to try to describe them and try to describe what the effect they have on you as a reader that diminishes your experience of the book. And I guess I have a very similar question. So that is,
Yeah.
that's my best answer to your question, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm in the same, and I really want to continue, evincing and saying, I really think I found this book difficult for the first half and then very engaging for the second half. But there are some things about it that eventually, and I think that's what we're going to like about today, is like what we do every time, is like what we like, how it worked, what we didn't like, how we thought it didn't work. But there's a quote that I want to hover over at least my experience of the book, and I'm going to just say it here at the beginning. And it's from a Grace Paley story. And in it, she says, all characters, real and imagined, deserve the open possibilities of life. And that I found myself coming back to again and again in this plot and with these characters. And I think we're probably going to get into it. And this is one of those, this book is sort of one of the reasons why we have decided to do this podcast, where we get to examine without opposition books that we like, or in some cases find less engaging.
Yep.
And so, that was sort of my host fiat to kind of bring that part in. And I think you should kick us off with your question about rules.
Well, I think it relates to what you were just saying. And so I was going to ask you, this is a tough one. This book breaks a lot of rules. It breaks a lot of particularly sort of literary rules, but also non-literary rules. This book breaks a lot of the rules that say popular trade sci-fi has been published. It was originally published in China, as I understand it. I don't think it would have been published in English if it had been written in English and submitted to an English, who published it? Tor or somebody like that?
Yeah.
I don't think Tor would have published this if they had got it as a submission. I think they would have said, it's too wonky, it's too hard sci-fi, you have these long stretches of setup, there's not enough action, et cetera, et cetera. But it became very, very popular in China. And so they're like, well, it's really popular. I guess we'll translate it. We have Ken Liu translating the first book. I think there's a different translator for this one. So I was wondering, and if you want to move on to the next question and be thinking about this and come back to it, can you think of an example in which Cixin Liu breaks the rules to the benefit of this book? And can you think of an example in which he breaks the rules to the detriment of this book?
Yeah, totally. I think I can do that. I might have to abstract the detriment part.
Sure.
And I think the break the rules to the detriment is kind of an easy one, but also kind of gets back to what I was just talking about. And like I don't think that even if we are in the world of hard sci-fi, I think that it is important to have characters and plots that operate somewhat organically. And as this book continued, and as I heard a character once again say something like, "Oh, don't worry, that's not important. I'm not going to do anything about that. That's just a ceremonial thing that I want." I was like, fuck off. You're going to clearly you believe the opposite of the thing that you say that you believe in. There's going to be another massive reversal, and Heinz's wife is actually a wall breaker, and Zhang Beihai is actually an escapist. And there's this eventual point where I got very cynical about all of the characters because I couldn't believe in them anymore. And it is, I'm going to go back to the bad dungeon master problem. If you suddenly have your NPCs that are quest givers or are ostensibly allies with your player characters, and you routinely have that NPC betray the PCs, not only are your PCs and your players going to be distrustful of the world you've created, they are going to be distrustful of you. And that is a problem if the person that we are starting to distrust is the author. Because eventually I was like, I can't believe any of the character setups that you are putting here, because you have shown us repeatedly that, in fact, everyone is simply going to do the opposite of what they say they're going to do. Which, and this is one of the things that I'm like, well, maybe this rule breaking that I'm saying is a detriment of the book actually is a positive feature of the book, because what it actually reveals is that, human nature is pretty bad. But I don't think that's actually what's going on. And so he breaks the rules of organic plot and character setup in a way that eventually I found tiresome and I found actually predictable. I was just like, you know what? I think something's going on with Zhang Beihai. Yeah. And sure enough, that sort of that penny dropped in a way that I had predicted. And I really dislike it when things that I predict come true because I'm like, no, these people are better than that. So I think that is one way that he breaks the rules in sort of a detriment of the book. But then I will also say that for the very same reason that he breaks the rules, that the book achieves something grander than a narrative with organic characters and an organic plot development, and is probably the only way that he could have achieved it. If he were to stick to the rules of traditional literary development, this book wouldn't be 500 pages long. This book would be 900 pages long. And because he just does a lot of shorthanding in order to get the plot out. And what he eventually gets out is better than a piece of fiction. It's not a cornerstone philosophy, but it's a philosophy. And a sweeping one. And I think that if you can kind of be like, and this is where I found myself, okay, I'm not going to get traditional character development. This plot is not organic. It's intensely created by its creator in a way that I eventually could really see the seams. But it doesn't matter, because the point that he eventually achieves, I think, is breathtakingly large. And I think true. That the universe is a very dangerous place, and we should be careful with our human-sized arrogances.
Or at least we're thinking about. Yeah, so main interest, I got a couple reactions to that. The character for whom what you're describing to me seems the most that way is Zhang Beihai. Particularly, there's that moment where I think the first time I read that he was, takes the over the ship and sends it out, I was completely fooled by that the first time I read it. And then I think having read it again, I go back and I'm like, oh, he's kind of building to something. And I think part of it is just like there's so many characters, it's a little hard to track, that his arc's a little harder to track. And now looking at it, like, yeah, he's building to something. But then there's the second time where he's already gotten the 5 ships, and he's like, yeah, will you go ahead and like give me acting captain privileges again? That to me is the moment that's most like what you're describing, where you're sort of like, come on, like, and then you get the same arc with all the wall facers too, but I'm curious, how does Luoji's Last Stand? How did that read for you? And I mean, I feel like there's enough setup that you kind of feel like something's going to happen, but were you how satisfying was that moment? When he sort of pulls out the gun and talks to Trisolaris.
I mean, I was just like, oh look, just another like. There's a
Here we go again.
Here we go again. Don't look behind the curtain. Kind of moment like this. Just and that it was satisfying insofar as like the book has to end at some point, and one of these machinations has to be successful. Something finally has to get the better of the Sophons and the Trisolarans, because if not, then the detail about the Trisolarans not being able to do artifice would be useless. Yeah. And that's a very important detail that I think is done is set really, really nicely in the first book.
Yeah.
And I didn't see these problems in the first book. And I feel like in some way, I wonder if he set out to attempt a project of this scope, because there's a lot of parts of the first book where it does feel like organic character development. And a lot of the things that Ye Wenxia does is because of a real emotional reaction she had to the death of her father.
Yeah.
And I think he's gotten a little far away from that by the end of this book. I found that scene satisfying because I was like, way to go, Luoji. Like, way to complete that protagonist character arc and show us that actually you are not as like the self-centered playboy that we have sort of thought you were. So I was happy for the happy ending, while at the same time being like, oh, look, just another big plan that the dungeon master is keeping from us.
Yeah, I see.
Here's an example. The number of times that the Great Ravine is sort of like dangled in front of us as like, ooh, the Great Ravine. And like, we're not told about it and not told about it and not told about it and not told about it. And finally, Luoji is like, hey, now that things are not trying to kill me, do you mind telling me what that Great Ravine is? And I was like, oh, this is a slot in the book that is like, here's the exposition of the Great Ravine. Right. And it's not even that interesting. Like, it's not even very well described. But it's just one of those things where, like, I just feel like the experience of this book is him being like, how do I package this information and hide it in a way, because I can't reveal it all at once. That just wouldn't work.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, like, the final scene works, and it feels, I think the thing that I loved the most about it was how tender the Trisolarans actually are. They're like, you should sit down. Should we call you an ambulance?
Is that tender or is that fear?
Well, but the thing is like, it could come across in a different way, right. And maybe it is fear.
Yep.
But what I loved about it was like, it's just like, wow, that's not what I expected. I didn't expect that.
Well, and there is an interesting moment, like this, where the Trisolarans sort of like, strategy is where we failed, where they have that they kind of have that sort of musing conversation about why they weren't, why they didn't fall for the con. I guess I like con man stories. I'm thinking about American Gods, and like my favorite parts are sort of like, when Mr. Wednesday like dresses as the bank security guard out front of the bank, and then they make it snow, and then they put the sign that says "out of order" on the ATM, and it's like, here's this like ancient being who's supposed to be Odin running like a 1930s era con. There's something about like the cheapness of Luoji's trick that I really enjoy. And I like how the plot device that allows Luoji to triumph is connected to that philosophical idea that he figures out something about the universe. And then the entire book is he's like, everybody thinks he's crazy. He himself thinks he's crazy. And he is kind of that selfish playboy. Like, you have the sense that like this is the reluctant hero. And so I do like his arc, but I hear what you're saying about kind of the other. It feels like the wall facer plot plus Zhang Beihai isn't technically a wall facer, but he kind of behaves like one, right? So it's kind of like totally. You get 5 of them, and they do start getting kind of similar, and I don't know, like Heinz, just his whole thing to me just feels like it's completely stranded and kind of pointless, like a complete red herring. And I do think the challenge that Cixin Liu is trying to overcome with this book, the first one can really be driven by kind of the creeping awareness, and we can really put our characters through that. I think this one, you're basically, you've got the core idea, which is the dark forest. And well, actually, I want to read something that I dug up. I was thinking about this morning, so I actually pasted it into the rundown. So this is from the introduction to The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin, which I still think is one of my favorite books, and it's one I hope we talk about on this podcast at some point. So at the beginning of that book, which was, I believe, written in 1969. So Le Guin is a woman writing in sci-fi, and she's also, she encounters a lot of literary types who sort of denigrate science fiction. So she's kind of a double outsider in some ways, too. Science fiction is often described and even defined as extrapolative. The science fiction writer is supposed to take a trend or phenomenon of the here and now, purify and intensify it for dramatic effect, and extend it into the future. If this goes on, this is what will happen. A prediction is made. Method and results much resemble those of a scientist who feeds large doses of a purified and concentrated food additive to mice in order to predict what may happen to people who eat it in small quantities for a long time. The outcome seems almost inevitably to be cancer. So does the outcome of extrapolation. Strictly extrapolative works of science fiction generally arrive about where the Club of Rome arrives, somewhere between the gradual extinction of human liberty and the total extinction of terrestrial life. This may explain why many people who do not read science fiction describe it as escapist, but when questioned further admit they do not read it because it's so depressing. Almost anything carried to its logical extreme becomes depressing, if not carcinogenic. Fortunately, though extrapolation is an element in science fiction, it isn't the name of the game by any means. It is far too rationalist and simplistic to satisfy the imaginative mind, whether the writers or the readers. Variables are the spice of life. This book is not extrapolative. If you like, you can read it, and a lot of other science fiction, as a thought experiment. Let's say, says Mary Shelley, that a young doctor creates a human being in his laboratory. Let's say, says Philip K. Dick, that the Allies lost the Second World War. Let's say this or that is such and so, and see what happens. In a story so conceived, the moral complexity proper to the modern novel need not be sacrificed, nor is there any built-in dead end. Thought and intuition can move freely within the bounds set only by the terms of the experiment, which may be very large indeed. The purpose of a thought experiment, as the term was used by Schrödinger and other physicists, is not to predict the future. Indeed, Schrödinger's most famous thought experiment goes to show that the future on the quantum level cannot be predicted, but to describe reality, the present world. Science fiction is not predictive, it is descriptive. And
Fuck yeah.
And she goes on to say that the role of the science fiction writer, like the role of any writer, is to lie. And it continues. It's a great essay. I recommend everybody read it. But I think, what was trying to happen here, and is happening here successfully, although maybe with asterisks, is let's say that the universe is a dark forest. And let's say the universe is a very dangerous place, and Earth's closest neighbor is a much more technologically advanced civilization, and they want to settle our planet. And then how does humanity react to that? And I think that's why we get this kind of like epic series of reversals in the human attitude towards Trisolaris and to the wall facers, right? So like when they first have the wall facers, they're all like heroes. And when humans start getting the glimmer that Luoji isn't doing anything and he's just living in his like Norwegian, pleasure palace and like getting drunk, then they turn against him. And then when he comes out of hibernation, they don't exactly turn, they've just kind of forgotten about him. And then somebody discovers that star that he cast a spell on blew up, and then he's a hero again and he's a messiah and they're like Lord. And then 2 or 3 years go by and they're like, all he's doing is moving some bombs around space. You know what? He's a bum again. And I think that is where this book lives. I think that is the idea that Cixin Liu most wants to explore. And then I think, then it gets a little messy. I don't think he entirely knows what he wants to do. Does he want to do kind of like a series of cons, and which one is the right con? That's what the wall facers are. And that they're not that interesting. Luoji is the only interesting one. Zhang Beihai proves much more interesting, in my opinion, than the other wall facers. And I do agree it gets a little bit clumsy there towards the end, although I do think he does some good misdirection in sort of suggesting that maybe Zhang Beihai is just tired and has gotten kind of senile and but really Zhang Beihai has figured out what's going on before any of the kids, and it's just sort of, he kind of lays another con on them, and you saw through that maybe because you're more perceptive than I am. So I think, it's not a defense against what you're saying, but I think that it's a sort of convoluted project. And I think I would defend Cixin Liu's. I think I absolutely love that he wants to say, let's say the world is a dark forest. How does the humanity that I know and love or hate react to that? And kind of create characters who are sort of stand-ins for ideas.
Yes.
That's how he does that efficiently. That's how he does that in 500 pages rather than like 1,500 pages. And I'm there for those ideas, but then I also feel like the book suffers from a kind of, I think he figured out what was good about it about 3/4 of the way through, and then kind of focused on that. And then, I was going to even ask you, like, what do you think about the Wallfacer Hines arc? Like, what does it serve any purpose, or is it just like a stranded setup, a setup with no payoff?
Why is Hines not in jail? Why did she have enough leash to go and kill herself on the big iron thing in the UN building? Like, that's one of the, I'm sort of agreeing with you by showing up this part of like,
maybe Hines isn't in jail because his defeatism was proved accurate. One of the things Luoji does say is that actually all the wall facers were secretly defeatists because they actually all understood the technological gap. Maybe that's the explanation, but there's this like really weird like hugging it out moment between Hines and Jonathan, the kind of like the doomer of the Wallfacer program, like the new UN guy who's like the Ava Strat of the future.
It's like, and we don't even get that. But like Hines is walking around up until the defeat, and I'm just like, no, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah, it's a little clumsy.
I mean, like that, and that sort of goes to my next question about plot versus blocking.
Yeah.
So like blocking in theater is just the like, hey, in order for us to get from curtain up to curtain down, like the characters and the props, like they have to move in a way that we have planned out obsessively from the beginning. From the beginning of rehearsal, it's like, no. And like those of you that have seen Noises Off will be like, no, you have to take the sardines backstage. You can't leave the sardines. It's going to fuck the rest of the play. And I was wondering, and plot, we've talked a lot about the fact that plot does have to at least appear organic. It has to seem that the next thing comes out of the decisions and the arrangement of events that the characters are in charge of. And I found this book to be blocking and almost no plot. And I was wondering if you feel the same way, or if you can prove me wrong and point out a moment where it isn't just blocking, where there is a moment where the next thing arrives out of a decision that a particular character makes, in a way that felt organic to you.
I mean, I think there's only really three moments like that. And one is Luoji's second spell, the spell that actually works. I do think there's a problem with that, which I'll get to in a second. One, there's Zhang Beihai's, the payoff of his plot to steal a ship, which proves accurate. And then there's the decision of the various officers on Starship Earth to engage in the dark battle, or is that what it's called? The Battle of Darkness.
The Battle of Darkness.
Right.
Yeah.
But so to me, those are all moments that are based on characters realizing, learning something, making a decision, growing in some way, and doing something that alters the plot. And so I sort of agree, but I also would say that, like, I do think there's more blocking, because I think, and this is the part that I would actually sort of defend, is that I think Cixin Liu is writing a book where the characters are mostly helpless. And that is the rule breaking that I'm okay with, and we've seen examples of it before. We've seen, The Arrest. We have seen The Diamond Age, and we've talked about it, and we've talked about the struggle. I think the mistake here, though, the thing that The Diamond Age does okay, the thing that The Arrest does masterfully, is that it takes us out of the first person of the man with the plan. In The Arrest, it's the woman with the plan. We talked about this when we talked about The Arrest, is that it would be really boring if Madeline, who is the person who comes up with the plan to save the community, was the main character, because she hatches the idea like 6 weeks before the climax, and she sets the preparations in motion. And so if you were in her internality, you have to shield some of her internality from the reader, which is what happens with both Zhang Beihai and Luoji, which is we get a lot of their internality. And in particular, I do like Luoji as a character. I mean, I think that he is like genuinely not heroic until he has no other choice but to be.
Yes.
And
correct.
that's kind of great. And no other choice in the sense that he has to grow into being a more responsible human because of the circumstances around him in a way that does feel interesting and organic. But his personality is basically like he just would like to be napping on the beach somewhere, like having a rum, That's all he wants. That's all. And there's even this moment where, when he's been woken up and he's talking with Dasha, and he's like, look, the Wall Facer program failed. It's great, Dasha. Let's just hang out and enjoy this new world. We got 200 years before the Doomsday Battle. We're useless. It's great. We're free, And then he does, in fact, have to be the hero. So I like that a lot. But I'm fine with the idea of hapless protagonists who break the rules, who don't necessarily advance the plot. But then I think the problem is Cixin Liu's trying to have it both ways, because
I think you're right.
He's giving us
a great observation.
Yeah, he's giving us Zhang Beihai and Luoji, but he's not telling us. We think we know what they're thinking, but we don't, and that's actually the dishonesty that's happening.
Yeah,
there's some part.
That's the moment of bad faith.
That's the bad faith.
It's a problem of perspective.
Yeah.
Like when you give us too much limited, when you give us too much limited third person, when you've like, I think this is brilliant what you've just pointed out, like that he is trying to have it both ways, but you can't have internality of the grand like plan and have a hapless protagonist at the same time. Yeah. And I think maybe that's the like, and I think the fact that you were like, everybody's hapless. And I was like, yes, this is one of the first novels that we read where I was just like, oh my God, hapless protagonists. How about hapless populations?
Well, and I would also argue that probably there is a kind of meta character, which is humanity. And,
yes,
and that all of these characters are like, they're sort of like the psyche of humanity, the warring psyche in a way. And I think, and that's kind of cool, but yeah, I think that is the problem. And that's also why that like, the moment where I forget her name, the captain of natural selection realizes, oh, we're gonna die unless we attack one of the other ships, and then she has that conversation with her officers, and they go to talk to Zhang Beihai about it, and he figured that out weeks ago. But when she makes the decision, she says, "It's gonna be on me. I'm gonna go to hell. I'm gonna kill them." That's a really powerful moment because nothing is hidden. Like it's not like Cixin Liu is like, oh, and then she realized something and she went into this wardrobe and launched the torpedoes. We know exactly what she's thinking. There's this amazing moment when they're talking silently to one another, which is beautiful, sort of poetic. There's this kind of like, but that's the only one that does feel organic that way. And I think you're right. The other two are kind of cons of us, and you can't really con the reader that way, even though
because you lose their trust. Yeah. And that's when you lose a reader's trust, and when you lose the trust of your players in a D&D game, it's over. Yeah. You can't get the trust back. And that section that you're talking about, I think, was my favorite section of the book. That like it's all in italics in the book. The humans have sort of begun to devolve in a very unsettling, but he makes a real case that is completely inevitable, that this is the way that we would begin to think given the situation. And
maybe suddenly, necessary, you know?
Yeah, right. Totally. Like suddenly I was like, I'm in. Yep. Like here we are. All of the things that I love about literature: uncertainty, emotion, difficult decisions, tragedy, the nature of the human condition to get in our own goddamn way all of the time. Yeah. And that's why I think I am really enjoying my ambivalence about this book, where I'm like, God, there are moments where like the craft of it is very clunky. And like my next question you already kind of addressed was like, I don't think there are any characters in this novel. There are ideologies. And in fact, I think that maybe Luoji is the example opposite, because he grows out of his ideology, and his original ideology is just like, I just want to like sleep with a bunch of people. Yeah. And, you know, he eventually does move in the direction of a real character. But yeah, the other problem I had with all the characters is that people don't divert from their ideologies in any kind of satisfying way. Yeah. It all turns out that Ray Diaz was like, you know, an evil mastermind from the get-go. And Tyler was like, thinks that, you know, was going to attack the humans from the get-go. And like, and it's one of the reasons why I call foul on his claim that he is not allegorizing, you know, his particular cultural history. Because, you know, like ideology is so important to these political structures that like, it's not just Cixin Liu's political structure, it's ours that are in opposition to that, or a Western ideology that's in opposition to that. But despite all of these problems, despite I don't think there's actual plot, except for that moment that you pointed out. I don't think there's actual character. I think it's all just ideologies that are put into a jar and shaken up. Despite that, the effect is so ambitious and grand and affecting. I'm like, whatever. Like, I'm very glad I read this, and it has made me think differently about our galaxy.
Yeah.
So you know what? Like, fuck the rules.
Yeah. Dasha is a character, a real character.
Yes. Right.
And I was just doing a thought experiment, which is like, I don't think this would work exactly, because Dasha is a character who is really good to look at through Luoji's eyes. Mm-hmm. Could you possibly have that penultimate, the year 208, written from Dasha's perspective? Because, we now know what the spell was. So the thing that Luoji was kind of hiding, and when when Dasha would say, what was that spell about? He's like, I can't really explain it. I was crazy. I was paranoid. And then he has this moment right before he thinks the droplet's going to kill them, where he's like, I was right. The world is a dark forest. And he was right, even though the droplet's not going to kill him. And then at that point, we now know, I think, I'm trying to remember when the dark forest explanation happened, whether it happened after, it happens
after the Messiah scene.
After the Messiah scene, but before his final stand-up. So now we know what his plan was. And then he basically, we're like, but it's not going to work. And then in like about the span of 5 pages, he secretly does it again. He comes up with another secret way of doing the exact same plan. Yeah, I don't know. Clever. Interesting, I think I read somewhere that there are astronomers who have proposed the idea of using the sun as a lighthouse by creating kind of like space clouds. So he's basing it on some hard sci-fi. But it's also, I guess he set up the idea that the Trisolarans might have been tricked by that. There's even this whole like sort of exposition scene where they're talking and they're like, we didn't. Luoji's basically, you should have figured out what I was doing. Like, I was, why do you think I had the doomsday, whatever it was, the cradle. So, which is, he's lampshading at us a little bit but you could have just that last bit from Dasha's perspective. And then you're solving that one problem we're talking about, because we're not getting the illusion that we're in Luoji's internality when we're not actually in his internality. I mean, that's the bad faith that we're talking about here. I see why he does it, because he wants those payoffs to be good. He wants those payoffs to be surprising, but it does. I hear what you're saying. It does break up the trust. But I agree, fuck the rules. It was a fun book to read. I mean, I think a genuine flaw is just like how little action there is in the first half versus the second half.
I saw that you added and then removed your question about pacing, but I totally, 100% agree. Like, there are ways, and I think that what you're talking about right now is like, can we situate the narration in different manners to get the same effect without some of the clunkiness that both of us are experiencing.
Yeah.
And I think that would be really interesting and like fun to like play around with those ideas. And you can see it in examples of other books we've read. Like A Visit from the Goon Squad is a grand example of continuing to shift the perspective in such a way that the thing that you were trying to do just coalesces out of the actions and the interactions of the characters and their thoughts and emotions in a way that I think is particularly amazing. This isn't what that isn't what this book is trying to do. Yeah. And that's fine, and that's great, and that's why I wanted to bring up, like, how do we talk about books that might not be to our taste? Because the ambition here is huge. And in a way that, like, yes, Jennifer Egan's book is ambitious, but the scope is much smaller.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, this is a book of ideas, and it's a let's say. Yeah. And Yeah, absolutely. I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah.
Do you want to do your reading?
I love that. I love that passage that you brought of Ursula Le Guin's. I think as you were reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is Ursula Le Guin's version of Grace Paley's all characters, real or imagined, deserve the open possibilities of life. And it's great because, like, if something is extrapolative, you're locked in. You're on a roller coaster.
Yeah.
You're on a train.
Yep.
But if, in fact, the pursuit of not just science fiction, but literature is what if, then, the universe is our oyster, not even the world.
And that, I mean, I think that's what he's saying. And I think that he would agree with Grace Paley in the sense that, though, his human characters might be on a roller coaster, but Earth is ultimately his character. And Earth's future is not extrapolative. It's a thought experiment. And it's how does humanity behave in this situation? That's the thing he's interested in.
I want to read this not because, like, I don't think we've said a lot of the things in here. I just loved it.
Yeah.
This is a moment of just beautiful writing.
I think I pulled the same bit. This is Luoji and Dasha with the two cigarettes standing like 15 feet apart.
Yeah. Which I just thought was so great. Like that is such a great little like setup to like how does communication work in the galaxy.
Yeah.
And the moment I'm going to read is right after the two cigarettes have gone out. In the long silence that followed, the two flames went out. There was no wind, and the dark silence turned thick as asphalt, connecting sky and desert into a murky hole. At last, Shakyung uttered one word in the darkness. Fuck! Extrapolate that option out to the billions upon billions of stars and hundreds of millions of civilizations, and there's your picture, Luoji said, nodding in the darkness. That's really dark. The real universe is just that black. Luoji waved a hand, feeling the darkness as if stroking velvet. The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is an armed hunter stalking through the trees like a ghost, gently pushing aside branches that block the path and trying to tread without sound. Even breathing is done with care. The hunter has to be careful because everywhere in the forest are stealthy hunters like him. If he finds other life, another hunter, an angel or demon, a delicate infant or a tottering old man, a fairy or a demigod, there's only one thing he can do: open fire and eliminate them. In this forest, hell is other people, an eternal threat that any life that exposes its own existence will be swiftly wiped out. This is the picture of cosmic civilization. It's the explanation for the Fermi paradox. Shakyung lit another cigarette, if only to have a bit of light. But in this dark forest, there's a stupid child called humanity who has built a bonfire and is standing beside it, shouting, "Here I am! Here I am!" Luoji said. Has anyone heard it? That's guaranteed. But those shouts alone can't be used to determine the child's location. Humanity has not yet transmitted information about the exact position of Earth in the solar system into the universe. From the information that has been sent out, all that can be learned is the distance between Earth and Trisolaris and their general heading in the Milky Way. The precise location of the two worlds is still a mystery. Since we're located in the wilderness of the periphery of the galaxy, we're a little safer.
1.2, there's this image of flying over the Sahara and having a grain of sand shout at you.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, you know what, I pulled the exact same quote to read. Mm-hmm. I think having read this book a few years ago, that's one of the moments, it's just one of those moments that you remember. And I suspect that's when he had that image of the dark forest, that's when Cixin Liu knew he had a book or a series, that because it in a way, it's also the premise of the first book. We don't talk about it, but it's also kind of driving the first book as well. Really the whole thing. He's creating an entire universe ecology based on this one idea, and rendering it. It's horrific, but it's beautiful and poetic too.
Mm-hmm. And I love that the reason in this story that humanity is shouting here I am is Ye Wensea's like revenge arc.
Yeah.
And I get the sense because Luoji is set on this mission of alien sociology by Ye Wensea, who gives him the clues that he needs to figure out this idea. And it makes you start to wonder, did she begin to feel ambivalent about her decision? And I think that's one of
yes.
those moments.
I think the answer is yes.
And I love that. I love that is one of those classic moments of character. And in this case, it pays off over about 1,000 pages. And I think it's moments like that because I think, like I've thought about this book a lot in the last like 2 weeks, and you can make arguments that it's clunky and ham-handed and everything like that. But there are moments like that where you're like, no, he knows what he's doing. And, and maybe it got away from him in a way that is totally forgivable in service of this grander project. And so I think it's just what a great book to kick around in the Coliseum of ideas.
So I have one final thought. And you know that we already talked about when Cixin Liu is accused of pessimism or cynicism. Yeah. He often points out the Watcher, and says, the first message that in my books, yes, I posit the dark forest, I posit a hostile universe, but what's the first extraterrestrial being that Earth encounters, which is somebody saying, do not respond, hide yourself, be careful, and so this book ends with a conversation between Luoji and the Watcher, who identifies himself. He unfolds on a sophon, basically says, I'm the same one who warned Earth not to respond, and they sort of have a polite exchange. The Watcher says, love exists on Trisolaris too. And I'll just read from here. He says, apparently Luoji has made a speech that says humanity is the only, I forget exactly, but it says something to the effect of humanity assumed that the universe was safe because of love, and we're the only ones who have love. And the Watcher is like, I beg to differ. And he says, I know that at least Trisolaris has love, but because it was not conductive to the civilization's overall survival, it was suppressed when it had only just germinated. Yet the seed possesses a stubborn vitality and will grow in certain individuals. May I ask who you are? We've never met. I was the operator who transmitted the warning to Earth 2.5 centuries ago. My God, you're still alive? Zhuanyang exclaimed. I won't be for much longer. I've been in a dehydrated state, but over the long years, even a dehydrated body will age. However, I have seen the future I hope to see, and for this I am happy. Please accept our respects, Luoji said. I only wish to discuss with you one possibility. Perhaps seeds of love are present in other places in the universe. We ought to encourage them to sprout and grow. That's a goal worth taking risks for. Yes, we can take risks. I have a dream that one day brilliant sunlight will illuminate the dark forest. The sun was setting. Now only its tip was exposed beyond the distant mountains, as if the mountaintop was inset with a dazzling gemstone. Like the grass, the child running in the distance was bathed in the golden sunset. The sun will set soon. Isn't your child afraid? Of course she's not afraid. She knows that the sun will rise again tomorrow.
Yeah. Solid. Real good.
And he's giving us Hemingway, and he's giving us a reference to the child in the dark forest. He's giving us Martin Luther King. It's he's nothing if not literary. But there's also, he's not cynical. He's positing a scary world, but he's maintaining a place for certain human values.
To paraphrase my high school English teacher, paraphrasing Adrian Rich, Adrian Rich gets a lot of flack for being, she's just a grumpy old spinster. To which my English teacher at one point said, "Well, in that case, so am I."
Wonderful.
And I think, I mean, like, yeah, it is not cynical to reflect a cynical world.
Right. Well, should we do some trivia?
Let's do some trivia. So we got a little intro to the Fermi paradox there at the end. And the dark forest hypothesis advanced in Cixin Liu's novel of the same name is simply another in a series of hypotheses that seek to explain the Fermi paradox, which is statistically extraterrestrial life should exist, but at this point no evidence has appeared for that high statistical probability. Which of the following are names of the actual possible answers to the Fermi paradox? A, the great filter. B, the quiet, loud, and grabby aliens. C, the berserker probes. D, all of the above.
Well, I happen to know that the Great Filter and the Berserker probes are real, so I'm going to deduce that there must also be loud, quiet, and grabby aliens out there.
There are loud, quiet, and grabby aliens, which is just like a great distilling. You are correct. Bravo. Quiet aliens know better than to make their presence known. And then, unfortunately, because of that, quiet civilizations sort of appear and disappear without a trace.
Yep.
Sort of like a stone plunking into a pond and then disappearing.
Yep.
Loud aliens meet their end by being loud.
Right.
There
are loud aliens. There are old aliens, but there are no loud old aliens.
Yes, 100%. And then there are grabby aliens, which are sort of the aliens of the dark forest, or just the peoples of the dark forest. That is to say, like, you're in a real bad spot if you announce yourself, because the grabby aliens, as we get in this book, are as likely as not to simply destroy a civilization without even going to check on it. I just thought that, and the names are just wonderful.
Grabby gonna grab. I always assumed the grab aliens were the kidnappers, but no, they're the squashers. They're the whack-a-mole aliens.
Exactly.
The mallet aliens.
Right. Yes, in the amusement park of the universe.
The loud aliens are playing skee ball. The quiet aliens are at home reading, and the loud aliens are playing whack-a-mole.
The quiet aliens, like, what's the most boring thing you can do at the amusement park?
I don't know. Like,
just
sit on a
ride in the
bench and read a book. Sketch.
There you go. Yeah.
Well,
all right. What do you got?
Mine is very similar to yours. Mine is also about the Fermi paradox. So, which of these prominent sci-fi writers did not explore? And I should say, so the Dark Forest is Cixin Liu's name, but it's kind of it's a variation on what's sometimes called the hostile universe. He's not the first person to have the idea that civilizations might be hiding and might be quiet because they're nervous about being wiped out, and also might be inclined to wipe out loud civilizations. So it's a variation on that. The Dark Forest is his own particular poetic name for that. So which of these prominent sci-fi writers did not explore a similar hostile universe idea in their fiction? Again, this is a did not. A, Fred Saberhagen. B, Greg Bear. C, David Brin. Or D, Larry Niven.
God, this is an interesting edition of Niven in this particular case. I know that two of those three did. I know Saberhagen and Bear did. I'm not sure about Brin. And oh God, I'm just racking my brain for the Niven books. And the thing is, in like most of the Niven books, like, we're far enough into the future that a lot of these questions have already been like sort of answered and put behind. Like, we like we know, like, don't fuck with the Cixin. Like, we know that is like that's just a tried and true knowledge, but there's never like, oh, we should send some space catnip to those cats. Oh God, I'm gonna go with Niven.
You got it.
Yeah,
it was Larry Niven, in fact. He explores other explanations for the Fermi paradox, which particularly I'd say sort of quiet alien, but also just the idea that there might that the world's been around a long time and civilizations can flourish and die off in what to us would seem like a long time, but what to the universe is not a particularly long time. And so Ring World is sort of an example of kind of like an ancient that we never got to meet those guys because our timing was different than theirs.
Which I think is, I mean, like, that's it, digging around in the Fermi paradox, like, the thing that just keeps coming up again and again is, like, civilizations are short and universal time is long.
Yeah, there's the filter, and I think that one is the sort of rise and fall hypothesis or the collapse. Radiolab did a bit about that where they sound designed it, where they were sort of accelerating the process. So they had some sound design that was sort of like a baby being born, and then it was like nuclear holocaust, like, and then the civilization is born, baby, boop, boop, boop. And then pretty soon, maybe they'll last 1,000 years, maybe 10, but eventually someone's gonna...
like violent sound design was always great. The one that I always bring up is the game theory one, and it's like a machine gun versus a like. Maybe it's applause or something like that. But I mean, yes, of course, their sound design is amazing. Their Radiolab, that's what they're known for.
Yeah, I remember they did something about like the prisoner's dilemma, and then also something about like nuclear escalation game theory as well.
Yeah, that was the one that I'm. Are you going to read this book again?
Well, yeah, but probably not for a while because it's been 3 times pretty recently, and so I want it all to be fresh again. But I think I will. I mean, the ideas are so wonderful. And certain moments are so vivid, even though if you do read, you have to get through the first half. I even enjoy the kind of campy bits. Like, I really enjoyed Luoji and Dasha, on underground Beijing being attacked by robots. Like, I mean, that was a lot of fun. And basically, like, once we get to the second half, it really picked up. So I think I will one day, but it'll be a while. How about you?
I'm gonna reserve judgment until we finish the third book.
Okay, fair enough.
I will answer the question about books 2 and 3 when we get to the end of 3. I'll read the 3-body. I'll read the first book again. I think that's what I said last time. Yep. And this one, I was frustrated enough by the feeling of being railroaded and eventually losing trust in my author.
Yep.
But I also understand how difficult the middle book is. You have to make sense of the first book without recapitulating its kind of terms and plot. And you have to set up the third book without tipping your hand.
Yep.
And it's just, it's just the stepchild book. I'm going to wait until the third, and if the third blows my socks off, I'm going to be like, okay, I'll do this all again.
Well, we've got a tenuous peace between Earth and Trisolaris. Who knows if that can last? We have the Trisolaran fleet somewhere out there needing to be rescued, and we have the 2 starships that are both going in opposite directions, just in case Earth doesn't make it. And all of that will come up in the third book, Death's End. And we're going to read part 1 for next time. So thanks for listening, everybody. Upper Middlebrow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are 2 hunters stalking through the podcasting jungle like ghosts, gently pushing aside branches that block the path and trying to tread without sound. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Wright. Thanks, guys. Find us on Patreon, where there are a number of tiers at which you could show your support.
And as a reminder, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. And even though we are two hunters stalking the podcasting jungle, we are merely looking to find you listeners and give you a grand gift.
Right. Not exterminate you.